world is becoming more unglued by the day. Local consequences are now showing up. We are seeing sky-high gas prices, higher food prices, shortages, and more. How should you respond? Go to redpills.tv/patriot. That's redpills.tv/patriot. And secure your long-term emergency food storage from My Patriot Supply. My Patriot Supply is by far the largest preparedness company in America. They're in stock and shipping quickly in unmarked boxes to your door. Their emergency food supplies last up to 25 years in storage. When you need it, it'll be there. Lunches, dinners, drinks, and snacks totaling over 2,000 calories a day. Get free shipping on any order over $99. Again, go to redpills.tv/patriot.
Spaceship in the sky to the simulation in the mind. Let's all embark on another journey of Conversations on the Fringe.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Josh, and I am here with two fantastic gentlemen. We had a show the other night, and it was just killer, and we're like, let's do that again, but this time with whiskey. So we decided to do it on a Friday night. And if you're just joining us, this is Conversations on the Fringe. This is where we take a break from the political drama that's unfolding in the world, unfolding global conspiracy, as I call it, and we talk about those things that are beyond the mind, beyond comprehension, behind understanding. Those things that go bump in the night, that fly in the sky, or those things that intrigue the mind the most. And what I say is bring about evolution of the mind, evolution of consciousness. And tonight we're going to definitely be talking about all those topics, anything from the occult, the universe, the mind, to, I think we left off starting with Nikola Tesla on Wednesday, and we were talking about Walter Russell. And we're going to be talking about all of that again tonight. My two guests, David Whitehead and Matt Presti. You guys can find David Whitehead at dwtruthwarrior.com and Matt Presti at mattpresti.com, mattpresti.com. And, Matt, please, I mean, this is your first time on Fringe. I know we did a show the other day. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Josh. Matt Presti. I hail from St. Louis, Missouri originally. Relocated to Salem, Missouri, the gateway to the Ozarks and Bigfoot country. They call me the wild man from Missouri when I'm in Virginia. I helped set up the Walter Russell Museum and restore the Walter Russell legacy to the planet for people to view his great work and keep his work alive. I did 7 years with the University of Science and Philosophy, formerly the Walter Russell Foundation, and I was the first guest on this platform here, which is totally fucking awesome.
Awesome.
So,
Unslaved.
Dave, Mike, and Josh, and all you great listeners who have nothing better to do on a Friday night but watch us drink whiskey, hail to you all.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if David wants to go ahead and introduce himself, but I think everybody here knows who he is. But David, feel
I'm
free.
just a crazy Canadian guy that has all kinds of conspiracy theories to share with you. So I'm glad to be here.
But are they conspiracy theories? I mean, it's not necessarily what the CIA proclaimed conspiracy theorists were back in the 1960s and the 1950s. Today, it has actually come out that conspiracy theorists, for at least the last 4 to 5 years, have been pretty damn accurate. And people are beginning to notice that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's a lot of stuff that gets put into this big basket called conspiracy theories, that a lot of it is hogwash, but so much of it's true. The core of it is true. You got to go to the guys that built this movement from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And they built it literally not by trying to build anything, but just to report what they were finding and blow the whistle on what they saw, and also share what they thought was going to happen if we kept going down this road. And it's funny how they use the word theory. Theory is something that's very valid in the scientific process, right? Yeah. Where you're observing a phenomena and then you're having a hypothesis, you're doing all of that. And at any moment, you could be disproven by fresh information, right? So that's why, even though you've got proof for something or you operate off of something, if something changes that, you have to change with the facts. So really, it's the pursuit of truth, and we don't ever get everything right, but it's correct to view certain aspects of the world with suspicion, certain aspects of our institutions, our government, our media, right down to the individual level. And so it's we call it conspiracy theory because that's what they insist on calling it. But I think this really just about researching reality, researching the criminal history of humankind, and trying to figure out how to prevent tyranny from happening so that we can promote freedom. So that's really what it is. All the other little segues and theories and this and that, it's up to everybody to sort through it and find out what they think is true.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I mean, David and I have been trolling some flurfs on Twitter the last few days, and we were kind of doing this like social experiment.
It is an experiment, yes.
And we were really seeing to kind of control the narrative, doing it on Twitter with the comments and stuff like that. It makes a lot more sense. But I simply just said, show me the evidence. And David, how much evidence have we seen in 2 days?
I'm still waiting. I am. Evidence for the whole deal. Like, there's a lot that has to be answered before we jump to that conclusion. And I'm just not impressed. And I keep getting told, oh, you just got to research it. And this is like the same with any of people, mm-hmm. You know, people have their pet favorites, and I get it. And I might be wrong, but they'll tell me, you got to look into it. Just go look into it. And I'm like, okay, but I did. I've looked into this since 2014. I've gathered literally hours and hours and hours and hours of research on it. I've put it on my Telegram channel called Flat Earth Refuted. And it's just there as, even if you believe in flat Earth, it's there to show you the opposite of your theory so that you have something to weigh it against. And then for those of us who don't go along with that narrative and feel that it's a false narrative, then there's the arguments, right? And yeah, so I'm actually in talks with a physicist. I sent you his profile, Josh. And I hope he gets back to me. Really cool guy, brilliant guy, knows this stuff inside and out. He has a great website with resources, again, to kind of put that into the pot. But in the end, this is like you said, Josh, it's everybody make their own investigation, their own observation. Don't just trust authorities. I'm in agreement with the flat Earth community on that. Is that, you know, it is important to question everything and challenge these institutions and say, hey, you know, it is important to point out flaws. It is important to be skeptical about certain things you're being told and ask for evidence. But it can get irrational. It can get out of hand, especially when the evidence is provided that you're being asked for, and it's just denial after denial after denial. And that's where I start to jump off. So there's a balance, but that's where I'm at with it.
Matt, what are your thoughts? I mean, when we look at truth, I perceive things as that there's an absolute truth that we cannot know. It's unknowable, it's inconceivable, it's incomprehensible. And that we only have this perspective of truth, this self-evident truth. And so we go through life utilizing our mental faculties and our levels of evolution to interpret what that really means. But in the public domain, the consensus, what are your thoughts on what's happening with this domain of truth?
We live in an eyeball, man.
I like that.
There's the new t-shirt, Josh. Let's call Rise Attire right now. Eyeball. Sorry, Josh.
Unflattened.com. I can't believe we're in this day and age. It's exciting. 2014, same here, David. I had a bunch of good friends, actually just two in particular at first, but then it became a bunch. And they're all like, dude, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. Why aren't you checking this out? Russell might be wrong. You better look into it because you'll be on the wrong side of history. But I kept my focus, right? And I did look into it for a good year and a half. I refuted it to my own satisfaction, but I would send these things back to these guys and they would not touch what I sent. So it made me very skeptical. And they kept repeating and regurgitating the same exact talking points over and over. 2,900 and whatever miles, this, that. I'm like, but have you looked into Russell's definition of gravity, Walter Russell, the great Walter Russell? Have you looked into the space octaves, the inert gases filling all of space, which account for the motions of light? Have you looked into the debunking work that I did personally with a guy from California on the so-called ether, which doesn't exist, which Einstein then took those properties and applied to his own space-time theory? They know a lot, but they don't know a lot at the same time. It's like they're so focused, hyper focused on disproving what they see as religion that they've become a religion themselves. And I'm standing on the outside of both of these things that I've disputed for more than 15 years now. And it's interesting to me that they just keep attacking what's established as opposed to really conclusively proving at least, we operate with models. So the person who's going to win this at the end of the day has to present a model that works for the times we find ourselves in, for our modern times. You would not even have your 3D video games if it wasn't for spherical trigonometry and its application to the video game code writing. There's all kinds of spherical math that goes into three-dimensional video games that half these guys probably play most of the day. So, before you shoot it down, you should really do at least a precursory look at some of the models that are out there that aren't mainstream, but are eventually going to, in my opinion, and it's well researched and validated through experimental evidence of my own and demonstrations I've seen done, that will replace this false physics with one that's closer and more in tune with nature than either one of these are.
God, I love that. You said something interesting there about this kind of consensus truth that they latch onto. And it's not just them. I think what is happening with the flat earthers is an extension of the big lie that's happened through the other domains of our society, most particularly academia, is that we've been lied at for so long that they create these models to trick us and to confuse us, to not make us realize our own nature, that this is been extrapolated into this conspiratorial model of the earth is just completely flat. And it does have this cult-like mentality. David and I were recognizing that, with a lot of these people, the idea of flat earth is a validation to them of their God, of creationism and God. And I think the same thing goes for, modern day physics and cosmology, is that the validation of their model is a validation of their lack of, or their spiritual beliefs that the universe is a mechanistic machine.
Yeah, and this is interesting. These are already great points. It's like, and Matt, I love how your work is actually, you're taking on all the sides of this. The kind of work we do on Unslaved as well, the same. Like we're not friendly towards all the institutions of science anyways, because we understand where some of the pitfalls were, the philosophies they based a lot of things on, the mistakes that had been made. But at the same time, like there are many geniuses we can go to that would have actually brought those two fields together, of the religious thought and the scientific thought, which is just representations of the left and right hemisphere of brain concept of thinking, right? Instead, they're both trying to eliminate each other, right? Like science is trying to eliminate religion and spirit and the consciousness aspect and free will, and the religionists are trying to eliminate science and go back into the Stone Age of thinking in terms of the left brain application to the world. So there's that. With these types of things, where this is what I did when I saw this come into our community in 2014. I started taking a lot of notes. Now, here's the issue. I'm still trying to sharpen up my math, my physics, like all that technical stuff. I'm more of a philosophical type of thinker. But I noticed trends in some of these arguments that were quite alarming to me, because I know a lot about the philosophies that a lot of this stuff is born out of, because we've studied it full time for 7 years on Unslaved. And I've studied it with Michael, who brings just heaps of scholars and thinkers. And when I was doing this latest presentation on blending the ideas of Walter Russell, Nikola Tesla, Wilhelm Reich, I noticed that they were all of the mind that there needs to be the elimination of that divide between the scientific mind and the religious mind, and more of a blending. Because if they communicate together, there's harmony, and that will produce a greater truth that everybody's trying to see. Because if you have two camps pitted against each other, never able to resolve it, either the participants are simply just calcified in their thinking and will not evolve their thinking whatsoever, which is what happens. We're not going to accept what they call evidence, and they're not going to accept what we call evidence, and vice versa, right? But the truth stands apart from all of us at that point. Now it's about what's that objective truth that we're talking about. And you even have people that will come on and say, because they don't like the confrontation, between, say, flat earth and spherical earth, or modern science versus religion, they start to become the middleman that say, well, it's both. It's both. Everything is both. Everything's neutral. Everything's the middle ground. And as much as I like to do that for diplomatic purposes, the truth is not in the middle in that sense. In some cases, yes, but the truth stands above all of that. And you either conform to it or you live a lie. That's Miyamoto Musashi. You conform to the truth or you live a lie. That's your choice. That doesn't mean we're always going to have it. We're always exploring. But when I hear stuff like this confident assuredness, I am 100% positive that, say, the earth is flat or whatever we're talking about, where there's no room whatsoever for any other information or other interpretations, that's where I start to have an issue. That's when I start to see that sort of like, okay, this is going beyond just some people that are trying to question science and question what they're told, right? And then when you're starting to then come to these people and say, hey, I hear your issues with NASA. I hear your issues with the media, with the science, with the government, with the Royal Society and Bertrand Russell and all these guys. I hear you. But what about your own observations? If my observations that I've made personally in my life multiple times, if I see that and I'm not seeing what you're seeing, does my observation count? And then they start throwing fallacy at you and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, so you're not really here. As we saw, Josh, in our debate, there was no discussion to be had. They're coming for blood. They're coming for scalps. And I'm like, okay, so, and that's fine. But it's just an interesting thing that in all these areas, we're all becoming calcified and more divided. Whereas the ideas of people like Russell, Tesla, and Reich, and many others, was to unify that in the best way that we could to align with the truth. And I'll finish really quickly with this. Wilhelm Reich has a brilliant analogy in his book, Cosmic Superimposition, which is the book I've been studying with my audience. And he talks about it as there's the stage and the meadow. And he said, what happens is the human mind, seeking comfort, seeking stability, seeking conformity, actually seeking it, goes into the theater. And there's a stage performance that's always happening on the theater. And that's where we determine our reality from, is the stage performance on the theater, right? He said, but all I'm here to try to do is to grab your hand and say, let me escort you out of the building, out of the stage show, and let me take you out into the open meadow under the glittering stars of the infinite heavens. And when he says shit like that, you start to go, whoa, what is he talking about? And then when he delivers on that promise and says, hey, did you know that everything that they were trying to tell you in the Bible, everything the Hermetics were trying to tell you, everything the ancient sages were trying to tell you, yes, it seemed confusing to us, but here's what they were really trying to say. And it actually does line up with science more than science will admit, because they've put themselves into a camp of dogma, right? So he's like, let's bring it all together and let's explore the fact that there's a connection between all things, from the micro to the macro, and in every way you can't even imagine it. It's so vast. So he compares Aurora Borealis, spiraling galaxies, hurricane patterns, with the internal, what he would call the organic energy forces that are actually animating. That's light that is now alive and active and creating. It's the source field, the organic energy. And he would say that force that swirls galaxies is the force that is lighting up your eyes and giving you inspiration and thought and everything else. And your body is the material expression of the other extension of that duality. And then I go, okay, let's pause Wilhelm Reich and go over to Walter Russell. And lo and behold, he's just got paintings and calculations and writings and poetry, endless, on the same thing. And then you go, what did Nikola Tesla say? And Tesla was maybe even a little more of a materialist in some areas, but he still had that just vast grand vision of the fact that he's like, we're just like slowly putting our toe into the door of the nature of reality. Mm-hmm. And yet everybody's walking around thinking they figured it out. And if we tap into that, wow, potential is just off the charts. So putting them all together, I went, all right, these guys are actually trying to evolve humanity and evolve thinking, whereas so much of what we see claims to be that, but is literally the opposite. It's psychological regression. And when we find out that humans naturally gravitate towards that, because we're running from a lot of other things we can get into, now you can maybe see why we're in a world that feels like a madhouse on so many different fronts, but it's not the true reality. That's just the stage show, you know?
I like that.
That is a well put series of statements, David. Yes, I agree thoroughly. Science is like, and religion are like two parents arguing, and we're the children stuck in the middle, you know, just going, can't you just both get along? Wouldn't it be better for our household if we had balance to look at the universe, as opposed to one camp pulling our arm this way and the other camp pulling our arm to the other opposite side? So really you have to let go of both of them. Religion sort of segregates consciousness, where science throws it out the window completely, and then throws a few mice in a cage, which are the neuroscientists looking for the piece of cheese that is consciousness, you know, with really no intent to find it, because they're looking in all the wrong places. I'm sort of with the Rupert Sheldrake, mix him with Bruce Lipton for your academician points of view on consciousness, which are really great. It's a field, right? It's something outside of us, but very, very much centers us, centers every cell of our body, tells our body what to do. This consciousness does, because we don't have to think about our hearts beating. Imagine how many thoughts we'd have to give in 1 minute if we had to literally think, okay, heartbeat, okay, you know, compress, expand, compress, expand. If we had to think about our digestion, you know, the cells centered by consciousness, which run on instinct control, which is really God control, which is what nature runs on. That's why it doesn't rise and fall like man's civilizations. Nature has continuity because it runs on that grand supreme consciousness. And to me, if you're not looking at that, at least consider it, you know, for the basic functions, because you are not conscious of your processes of the body. Instinct runs those once again. And how do we explain this thing called consciousness if we don't even explore it? And I think I've heard it said by many great people, you know, people come to these conclusions that consciousness is an effect of matter. And they come to these conclusions that there is no such thing as consciousness, but it's their very consciousness that's deciding that these things are so, which is a walking contradiction in itself. Yes, science and religion could definitely, as Russell said over and over, they need to come to the table and put their differences aside. Great men like Reich and Tesla, and you have your Schaubergers and your T.H. Murrays and others who, you know, even your Edley Scalnans who had some very incredible gifts that they could have offered humanity, but were more or less fearful of approaching them, because when you approach this kind of mediocrity, it always seeks to crucify that which it doesn't understand. And so these great geniuses, they end up being crucified by lesser minds. And a lot of them eventually turn to a hermit path and say, you know what, they're not worth it. I'm just not going to waste my time. And so incredible minds like Ed Leedskalnin, who could have given us the greatest gifts on planet Earth chose to work alone. I don't even want anything to do with those people. He probably tried. I would imagine all these great guys had tried. Walter gave his work of 1,000 copies to 300 universities and 700 scientists. He only got a couple of responses, one being Tesla. And of course, he said the same thing. Science laughed at my book, scoffed at it, and threw it in the wastebasket. So when we're presented with new ideas, that's what we tend to do. But like you said, I agree with this too. Your assessment of the two camps of, the flirters, is that the word you use, Josh? The flirters and the heliocentric spherical guys. I have nothing to fear but sphere itself, as they say. They are also what seems to be two cults fighting with each other over whose religious point of view is more correct. One has memorized the fallacies of the so-called other, and the other rejects the fallacies from their point of view from the other, with neither knowing that there's a third option. There's always another option. The model, it's a battle of models. I have heard countless physics professors talk about how the theory of the atom is only a model. They don't really know how it works, or they wouldn't be smashing particles together at the Large Hadron Collider, trying to, collect radioactive emanations in bubble chambers to see if they can find the God particle, which is actually carbon, because it's the most balanced particle on Earth. It's got 10 million known chemical bonds. It's 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, and 6 protons that they call these things, but it's the most balanced particle. It's equal in, equal out with a closed hole at the center. All other atomic elements have open holes that are either going toward closing or going toward opening. And so you got hydrogen, which is 1 electron, which is actually 1 ring. Think of a ring in water. If we throw a stone of hydrogen into a pond, there's 1 ring. Throw a stone of oxygen, there's 2. Throw a stone of so on and so on until you get to plutonium, which is 92 rings. They're not particles moving around a center. They're rings emanating from a center. And the faster it's unwinding, the more rings are thrown off. And that's why we see the aging planets like Jupiter and Saturn throwing off many rings, which wind up to become moons. I mean, that's what I like. I'm looking for a seamless cosmology. Walter is one of the very first to bring one to my attention. And if anybody has a better seamless cosmology, by all means, bring it forth, because it's helping me through the company I'm working with now to build a useful model that's going to provide human beings with a new form of energy production. And we have to think outside of these boxes. If you're in the box arguing with one corner of the box or the other, you're always going to be in that realm of argument. But to transcend out of that realm of the same old, you have to think differently. That means you have to learn new things. And so that's what I'm promoting. Just
I love it.
Get your heads out of the box, folks,
So you mentioned consciousness there. Now, I actually know an anesthesiologist, and I had a conversation with him about consciousness one time, because he awakened later in life about a lot of things that we're talking about. And he said that most medical doctors perceive the body as a machine, and that consciousness is this emergent phenomena that comes about through the functionality of our body. And he goes, as an anesthesiologist, that's anything but the truth. He goes, many doctors or scientists will tell you that we can shut consciousness off. He goes, that's actually not true. He goes, what we do to the brain, and as an anesthesiologist, he says you have different cavities in your brain, and each one of these cavities are resonating, they're vibrating. And he goes, what we do as an anesthesiologist is we just disrupt one of those cavities. And when you disrupt one of those cavities, consciousness can no longer sync with the body. And therefore, it's not experienced through the body. And he goes, but consciousness is absolutely 100% still there. It's just the body cannot receive the whole signal. And so I found that fascinating, too, that he was talking that each part of the brain, you have these various different cavities of your brain that are all resonating at a various frequency. And these frequencies converge in a harmony. And this is what allows for the conscious experience to happen. And then, you know, in my mind, I always go to drugs, right? Like, I'm like, well, I wonder if drugs like LSD and mushrooms, if they're just increasing or doing variations in that resonance. You have, you know, fifths and thirds and stuff like this in a musical symphony. And what we're doing is we're experiencing different perspectives or different oscillations of reality.
And you can trigger that organically as well by changing your environment, whether your heart rate's going up or whether it's going down. There's many different things you can do. Even your diet can impact that. But your state of mind is the most important thing. And if we're trying to realize that there are elements in our society that are trying to definitely manipulate thinking towards certain ends, right? We can't just look at that as just a monolithic conspiracy. We have to realize that people, many of us, were doing that to each other and to ourselves, right? Like that's where it starts, is on that level. This is why it goes out of the world of like the kindergarten level of understanding these things and brings you to the next level. This is just my opinion. When you realize you have a lot more control, at least over your faculties, than you think you do. And by giving all that power away to someone else and saying, well, they're the ones controlling me, that's literally where your power is going, is because you believe that. You're acting on that belief system. So change your mindset, change your belief system, and you'll see your life change. I've seen it happen. This is how I got to this point, to be honored to be able to do this work. And even in my martial arts career and everything else, it was always about understanding what that is and that you have that potential. And I've seen stuff that looks like magic by people that have mastered that. Even what you're talking about, Josh, the idea of you're not shutting off consciousness, you're just changing some of the settings. And so the consciousness isn't being decoded properly, right? Or it's changed in the way it's decoding. I've seen stuff like that happen even throughout the training I would used to do as just a byproduct of the training. And I've seen people do incredible things, not the crazy shit that they put out there, like guys firing lightning bolts and like disappearing and making people faint by just, that's bullshit. I'm talking about you're still applying your body, but like think of any amazing human feat you've ever witnessed. For a guy that ran the first 4-minute mile or whatever, there's a level that you have to access that sort of transcends the body, and the body catches up to it. And it's about, what is that, right? And for Reich, that was the same shit that caused hurricanes, the same shit that caused lightning storms, the same stuff that created superclusters. And he described it like this. He said he looked at the photo of the Magellan Cloud, and he said, this is where the energy is. This is sort of the starter phase. And then he moved on towards some of these other things he had noticed through the observatory photographs. And he was saying, see, this is the same pattern as we move towards a creation of a galaxy and the way it's forming planets and why it forms. Like, he was talking about the why of it. And then realizing that that's actually the process that's happening inside of you when life gets created. So he talks about the function of the orgasm, the function of even the fact that the word orgasm and organism come from the same, or organ come from the same thing. And even an organ, a pipe organ, is a musical instrument, right? And it creates resonant sound frequencies. So when you put it all together, it just takes the statement that we keep talking about so much, about that as within, so without principle. It just brings it to a whole other level of understanding. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's similar to, reminds me of Joseph Chilton Pierce's Biology of Belief. He quoted, he told a story of himself running down this hill, trying to help somebody or to get away from something. Maybe it was a wildfire, but he said he was running so fast down this hill that he couldn't logically think of how to move his legs to keep up with the speed of his body, but somehow he let go, and this autopilot sort of just took him. And he said it was like, I don't know, 100-yard hill at like a damn near a 75-degree angle of loose rock and shale, and somehow he made it all the way to the bottom. And when he got to the bottom, he didn't remember how he got there, only that he was there, and that something definitely higher than him took over, some form of an autopilot. And again, we touched on this on Wednesday's talk, but that's the vitalism principle is the same thing. And this is what these great minds, it's sort of, you call it the golden thread, if you will. I produced a 4-part series called Knowing the Creator 101. And I talk about this golden thread being this light of mind, or this chi or prana, or all the different names you could call it. The Force, they call it the Force in Star Wars. You know, there's a mythological perspective of this as well. In so many great myths, it's alluded to. But this is a real thing, and I think it's, you know, in the martial arts world, the zone in sports is similar. You know, we've talked about this, Dave, a lot, and I know
I like how you said autopilot. That's a good way to just keep it simple. That I've felt that many times.
Oh yeah. And I think if anybody's honest with themselves, so are they. Even women in childbirth, they just, when they let go, they often experience flashes of illumination, and they'll tell you, just like at near-death experiences too. This is all quantifiable, even though science doesn't want to take a look at it. But it's certainly something to keep in mind as a perspective for the vitalism point, especially when you look at all these great minds, from Reich to Schauberger to Russell to Tesla, and many others, you know, who Karl von Reichenbach, you know, with the Ode. There's many that talk about this vital substance, and it's some of them, half of them say it's actually a substance. The others say it's not a substance at all, but rather something that comes through the body, but animates it, kind of like electricity. You can't see it, you can't hold it, but you can sure get shocked by it. But it's just an interesting concept nonetheless. And I think the true pursuit of trying to understand this world, our bodies, and especially our minds, needs to not throw this concept out, but embrace it, you know, because it is more interwoven as a golden thread through many experiences, especially the greats among us, and should be thoroughly investigated to be further understood.
Wow.
What do either of you think that, what do you think that space is, if we were to say, because there's people that would say it doesn't exist, but if it was to exist, what is that outer space, and how does it relate to the inner space? Josh, what do you think?
So David knows this, that I developed a theory over the last decade, just kind of researching a lot of things. I got a science background, and then I also have this background in just researching the mysteries and occultism. And within the mystery schools, I started to see a pattern, like the same pattern. And maybe it was just me that recognized it, but I started to see the same pattern that just repeated over and over and over again. And I tried to rationalize it. And I realized that I would have to go to school to begin rationalizing it at a scientific level. So I went back to school and I studied, you know, physics and quantum physics and these types of things. And through many deep meditations and through kind of what I would call communications, I've kind of unraveled this. And I call it optimization theory. And what I think space is it's, well, it's twofold. I mean, there's a systematic approach in the sense of how I explain it, right? Systematic approach is that space exists in an optimized state. What I mean by that is that if we take, for instance, the yin-yang symbol, we have the convergence of, we can call it the masculine, the feminine, the implosive, explosive, the white, the black, the mixing of the waters, whatever we want to call it there. But really what I perceived was happening was you had two systems of energy coming together and forming a new system, an emergent system that comes together through the process of exchange between them. So they come together, they start exchanging and form a new third system. This third system is aggregate of them, or average of them. And this new system is more complex, it's more advanced, it's more structured, and it has a higher energy potential. Then this new system goes out there and does the same thing over again. It converges with another system. It produces a new third system. So this is the idea of the Trinity. We have the masculine and the feminine come together. They produce this new system, the sun, the birth of a new one. And this goes out there and repeats this process. Well, I started seeing this everywhere, in that our universe was the same process, the same system. And that when it comes together, what it's doing, in the sense of the law of conservation of energy, is it's moving to a point of equilibrium. It's moving to a point of what I would call sum zero. And the way I explain this is kind of with Maxwell's field equations in the sense of electromagnetism, is that if I have a wave here that's transmitting, I got a transmitter and receiver, it's pushing that out, and I got another one, transmitter and receiver, pushing another wave out, but it's 180 degrees out of phase. And those two waves meet, they cancel each other out. If you measure anything in between, there's nothing there. But yet I still have a power supply that's pushing those waves out. So I call that not zero, I call that sum zero, or a point of optimization. If I took another wave and I shot it perpendicular to that and I produced interference, all of a sudden you'd see inklings of that wave start to appear and then fall back to a point of sum zero or optimization. And I think that space in the universe is the system that originally converged at that sum zero state. It's at that point of optimization. And what that substance is, I believe it's just fundamental consciousness. I believe it is conscious. That energy itself is consciousness. That everything from the lowest depths of matter and energy that we can think of, the Planck's length, whatever we want to call it, is nothing more than a piece of consciousness and a thought in God's mind, if you want to call it that. But it all has a relative state of consciousness. And I look at this in the sense that if I'm alone with nature, right? Observation is a two-way phenomenon in my mind. Is that in order for me to observe nature, nature also has to recognize me. The same thing goes for God. And we can see this through that convergence of that same process. Two systems coming together, exchanging energy. It takes the two systems in order to form that relationship. The same thing with nature. It takes me and nature in order to produce this relationship. Same with any two people. It takes two people to produce this relationship. That relationship is where this flow of energy begins to incur and form this emergent phenomenon. And so I look at nature, or my existential reality, external reality, as this thing that's observing me, and I'm observing it. And we're in this relationship of energy exchange together. And this is why I think that things that we're talking about tonight, and a lot of these things, what we would call, I guess, magic in a sense, actually works, because we're in a relationship with the consciousness of the universe. And we're in communication with it. We just have to know its language.
Yeah, when you put it like that. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I tend to side with Russell's model. Again, I've thought about this a lot. I came out of quantum physics. I came out of the study of the ether in the early 2000s. And I looked at space-time and Einstein's ether, and a lot of it was just really difficult to understand. It didn't explain for certain things that are observable phenomena in nature, like vortices, for instance, and logarithmic spirals, things of that nature that have divine proportions. So his model, which is what I'll explain here, but it's until I find a better one, I'm open-minded, but I'm going to go with this because it seems to hold the most water, if you will. And that's that the Earth and all other spherical bodies, suns and everything else, are compressed together from the outside by the absolute cold and zero curvature of space. And much the same way, you don't need a hard shell to hold in a compressed condition. You just need cold to hold it in. There's no shells around snowflakes. There's no shells around frozen lakes. It's compressed by the cold, which makes it hard. It freezes it. And the same could be said for layers of the atmosphere. We have experiments that we can do to test this out to see for yourself. Freeze a drop of water and tell me if you need a steel container to hold its composure together. So in much the same way, the cold space gases are 3 octaves before hydrogen. They precede hydrogen. And why does science call them occluded gases? Because they leave something when it's heated up enough. And take, for instance, a magnet. If magnets, and yes, they are created through an electrical process, so electricity creates magnets, we know this. Mm-hmm. So no, there's not a force called magnetism. And I'll prove it, because I can destroy that force. If I put a magnet into a fire, it will no longer be magnetic. So how can magnetism be a force if I can destroy it? Okay, it's an interesting thought experiment, but nonetheless, these gases of space are able to penetrate the compressed condition of atmosphere, and they go straight and directly into space. So the two poles, like your nose, all planets, all bodies, all three-dimensional objects have a dual hemisphere. They're doubly charged, which means two positive conditions go in either through the poles or the hemispheres of the body, and they exhale heat at their equator. And that's where the occluded gases are given off back to space. And then everything in the entire universe breathes. The sun breathes every 11 years. It takes an inhalation and then exhales. Science falsely calls that change in polarity of the sun a change of polarity, but it's actually exhaling versus inhaling. And it's very interesting when you think of the universe as being alive as opposed to a machine, because it takes on a whole new meaning. And why would we think that animals can born their children, but planets and suns don't have a birthing process? They just freeze from a big bang from leftover gases in the middle of nowhere that happen to freeze into moons. What if actually some of the new models that have yet to be more explored, just because they're shunned by mainstream material science, doesn't mean they don't have credulity and shouldn't be investigated? I'm tending to think that as above, so below. So if things give birth to things, and it takes a male and female to come together and void that opposite condition in order to create an offspring from that union, then why not couldn't a planet or a sun be doubly charged? And it made a lot of people mad when I came out early on in 2011, 2012, said there's no Mother Earth. It's a Mother Father Earth. Oh, no, it's a Mother Earth. That's our goddess. Leave her alone. No, I won't leave her alone, because there's a hot red male contained by the cold blue ocean surrounding it, which keeps it from exploding, much like the cold of space compresses the planet spherically. And why can't you take a flat object into the Marianas Trench? Because it'll crumble up like a car in a car compactor. That's why. But if you send a sphere down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, guess what? It doesn't smash.
Interesting.
Think about it, guys.
Again, when you put it like that, I've been thinking about this a lot, about the disconnect between science and, say, someone like a Rupert Sheldrake, who's talking about morphinogenic fields, or a Nassim Harriman, who's talking about the resonance of all things, or any of these other guys. And you go, okay, maybe it's just semantics. Maybe it's just an issue with the terms, where if we say conscious, there's something that Michael said to me a while back, and he uses the word phenomenological, right? And he's like, phenomenologically, you exist in the here and now, and you are conscious, right? And you are viewing things. You are viewing as a conscious being. You are viewing the external world. But there's internal mechanisms that are a part of you that are allowing you to view. And yet you're going to view nature and these things and say they're dead things when you yourself are alive. Like, he looks at it as a contradiction. And that's how a lot of the philosophers looked at it, is that looking at the universe as a dead mechanistic thing is a contradiction in terms, because you yourself are a living conscious being viewing it. Just because we can't completely measure it all and understand it all just yet, who are we to say it's dead when, in fact, is the sun not going through its own cycles? Is it not emitting the heat that allows this planet to sustain life at the specific distance that's absolutely perfect? If it was closer or farther, we would all be dead, right? And so if you take, Gregory Sams, we had a show early on in Unslaved where he wrote a book called, and he's a scientist as well, he's a physicist, and he came up with this crazy theory that he's like, I think the sun is conscious, and I think that's where consciousness is born from. And think back to all the myths and legends about returning to the sun, and how all the heroes are the sun, the moon, and the stars just cast onto the canvas of the earth, right? And they all have the properties of the sun. All the savior deities have the properties that the sun has, and all the female deities have the properties that the moon has, etc. And you think, what's consciousness anyways? Well, if you this is where I went into this exploration in my Bible Decoded series called Children of Light. where I went into the Bible, and we could have looked at numerous ancient texts, right? We looked at the Bible, and it's giving you the definitions of light. It's even giving you the equations for light. It's giving you all these different things. And you go, okay, well, if we think of that consciousness as, in scientific terms, what they're talking about photons and bosons and all these different properties that they're understanding about light, the difference between a dead corpse and a living corpse is the conductivity of the light, right? Is that the conductor, the vehicle can no longer be the conduit for that light, that expression of light. And Walter Russell said, light is all there is. It's all we're dealing with. It's just expressing itself. And there's a process of how it turns from light into matter, right? And then you think about it. Even Richard Feynman and some of these physicists would come up and say, the fire that's burning in your campfire is just stored sunlight, right? The food that you're eating is just stored sunlight. The vegetables, everything is stored sunlight. So you're actually recharging your body with sunlight, both from physically going out into the sun and from consuming things from the earth, which are enriched by the photosynthesis and the photonic process of the sun. So that is allowing your physical body to stay at a field of resonance that it can conduct the light and keep you alive, keep the consciousness that you are alive. And so, and then we even look at what they're learning about the brain and the neural patterns and everything else, and how they're seeing light. Like, it's literally like your brain is lighting up in certain centers and is dark in other centers, especially if you're primary psychopath. Shit's just shutting off, right?